Will Howard is living up to the hype, continuing to meet and maybe even exceed expectations.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Buckeye fans, to your Tuesday edition of Locked On Buckeyes, your daily Ohio State podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Simply visit FanDuel.com to get started. During today's show, my guy Ryan Roberts is back with us once again. He is an NFL draft and college football analyst for A to Z Sports. And he's also a part of the First Team NFL Draft and College Football Show. Ryan is back, and Ryan, every now and then we get a chance to talk about NFL draft stuff in the middle of the season. We're doing that today, but before we get there, I'm curious if Ryan has thoughts about Will Howard and if Howard has met his own expectations for Will Howard's play this year. He has met mine. I had to kind of drop my standards, Ryan, for what I think a traditional or Ryan Day quarterback should look like, because Howard's not that. From what I thought he was going to be this year, he's having a career year. He's raised up his completion percentage, which was a big one for me. He is making all the short to intermediate throws. He's a better passer. He's a kind of runner Ohio State wants at quarterback. So I think with me lowering my standard for an Ohio State quarterback under Ryan Day, I would say he's met my expectations this year.
Yeah, I think he has for me too. I would call him a stabilizing force for this kind of offensive unit because, like, for me, Jay, like it quite simply, there's a couple different types of quarterbacks, right? There's obviously the elevators and there's the game managers. I feel that we always throw shade of the game manager, kind of moniker, but it's not a bad thing when you have a really talented football team. So I don't think, like, if you would have been young on the offensive line and young at wide receiver, like still talented, but just, maybe the guys aren't quite to their peaks or near their peaks, you might have needed a different type of quarterback. Like maybe you would have needed like a Cam Ward type of guy that could make some magic out of nothing at times. I think Will Howard's perfect for the situation. Like I know you're down Josh Simmons at left tackle, which is a big blow, but you have a talented offensive line for the most part. You have the best wide receiver room probably in college football. I mean, actually, I'm not going to say probably. They are the best wide receiver position in college football. You have two NFL running backs behind him, obviously, the ability to hand the football off. So you have structurally, and then a great offensive coordinator in Chip Kelly. So with all the things around him, I think that he is a stabilizing force. And I don't think that you should have expected Will Howard to come in here and be a elevator and be one of the top tier quarterbacks in college football, but you needed him to be a good quarterback in college football and a stabilizing force for your football team. I think that's what he's been so far this year.
I think it's what we got to see a little bit against Penn State and a little bit against Nebraska too, where Ohio State needed a guy at quarterback that didn't get rattled when things didn't go their way. We talked about the interception before the show, Ryan, and also that fumble. A lot of quarterbacks, even really good ones, they kind of fold when those things happen, especially at the start of a game in that environment. You're like, oh, here we go again. Some old habits are coming back, and I'm going to throw this thing, and we're not going to win the game. He doesn't normally get rattled, which is kind of shocking because most quarterbacks would get rattled in that situation. But it goes back to what I think you said, the stabilizing force that he has been, which has been big for Ohio State this year.
It has, because I mean, I think you could even just parallel it to what you had last year, obviously, with Kyle McCord, right? It's like we saw Kyle McCord in the game this year where it's like, you threw one, okay, let's get back. You threw two, you threw three, and then you ended up with 5 interceptions in a football game, right? Yeah. So I think that is important. I think that's obviously why the transfer portal is important, especially at the quarterback position. Like, experience matters. It does. Like, and especially with a team in Ohio State, and I know I've said this on your show before, there is no reason that this Ohio State team can't win a championship this season. Like, there's no reason at all. You have bankrolled this thing. You have talent out the wazoo. You have great coaching. You have 2 really good coordinators. Like, there's no reason that Ohio State can't contend for a national championship. And I think getting a quarterback that has experience and a guy that will not have those major downs and will have more solid stability and then some ups, I think that's what you obviously needed. I don't want to compare it to like the the early 2000 team with Craig Krenzel that beat Craig Krenzel that beat the Miami Hurricanes. But like he was that kind of guy, right? Like Krenzel was
Yeah.
like a stabilizing force for a team. Can Will Howard be a similar guy where it's like you have so much talent, just don't mess it up? I mean, could he be that type of guy? I think he very well could be. It's going to be about obviously getting hot at the right time, but right now they are on paper one of the best teams in college football. And I think that this is a team that if they play Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, I will be picking Ohio State to win that game, obviously for those circumstances on a neutral site fields in Indianapolis. So I think that he has been pretty much what most Ohio State fans say. I think that it's about realistic expectations. I don't think anybody saw Will Howard at Kansas State and was like, that guy is a superstar. That guy is elite. No, that guy was good, and that's what you signed up for, and that's what you have right now is a good college quarterback.
Ryan, for some very obvious reasons, I have not tried to make the Craig Krenzel connection with Will Howard. However, there's one thing Krenzel did after winning the national championship is he made it to the NFL. Will Howard came to Ohio State to win a national championship, but ultimately to also raise his draft stock. And I think his play this year, without diving into your evaluation yet, I think my knowledge of what quarterbacks in the NFL might be, I think he's done enough to raise his draft stock and even has a chance moving forward, regular season games, potential rematch with Oregon, they can get into the playoff. He still has time to continue to raise his draft stock, which is another box he's checking this season.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said because look, we need to separate buckets when we're talking about NFL draft prospects at quarterback. You are not drafting Will Howard to be a savior of a franchise. You're not drafting him to be even a starter for a franchise more often than not. You are drafting him to be a backup quarterback. And our initial conversation here was about stability, right? A stabilizing force. That's what you want as a backup quarterback. I know we fall in love with the tools. I remember when Cole McDonald came out of Hawaii a few years ago, right? Which was like the gunslinger. Everyone's like, oh man, that's the guy you want on day 3. And I'm like, no, that's not the guy you want on day 3. You don't want the flamethrower wild card. You want a guy that can step in and not kill you, a guy that you can depend on from a day-to-day perspective, not as a starter, but as a guy that's going to be in the room, that's going to be diligent, that's going to provide solid play. And I think that's what Will Howard is. So I don't think that Will Howard has the upside to rise to he's definitely not a first-round pick. I would be very surprised, though, even if he ended up being like a third rounder. Like, I don't see him as a top, day 2 football player. I don't see him as a top 100 football player. I think he's a day 3 pick that for a team that wants a stabilizing force as a backup quarterback who has enough size, who has enough athleticism, who has enough arm strength to at least matter in the grand scheme of things. So that's what I see of him. And I do think I think that there was some mid to late conversation of him on day 3 coming into the season. People liked some of the tools, but I think he has stabilized his own draft stock on day 3. Like, I would be surprised at this moment, unless he has a complete nosedive the rest of the year and plays awful football. I would be surprised if he wasn't a draft pick in April on day 3 and a potential backup quarterback on the NFL level, which there's nothing wrong with that, man. You collect a very nice paycheck for being a stabilizing force. There's no problem with that at all.
I guess some more questions for Ryan about Will Howard's draft stock and if something is maybe helping him and if something is hurting him. We'll dive into those next. This episode is brought to you by Roy. Ohio State fans, listen up. You need to download the Roy app. You have heard us talk about Roy this season and how they are revolutionizing the NIL industry. Roy allows you, the fan, to have a say in who gets the NIL money. And here's what I absolutely love about Roy. You get your money back if that player transfers. Roy is helping us keep our team intact, and it's actually good for the game long term. You can show your support for Jeremiah Smith by depositing a little appreciation onto that player's account. To do that, download the Roy app. You can see what the logo looks like if you're watching on YouTube, or go to joinroy.com. Now let's spotlight the Roy Locked On Player of the Week. It is my guy, Jeremiah Smith, because he now holds the record for true freshman receiving yards, true freshman receptions, and true freshman receiving touchdowns, because that man is a dog. We're going to throw some money into his account on Roy. Every contribution counts. 10, 20 bucks, it all adds up, and it's going to help your favorite players stay put. Join me and show Jeremiah Smith some love. Download the Roy app or go to joinroy.com today. Use promo code LOCKEDON Every athlete from every team is there. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for full terms. Roy, support the players, change the game. This episode is also brought to you by Billiards Plus. Billiards Plus has the best selection of pool tables, game tables, shuffleboard tables, and more. And the best service, it's Central Ohio. Now is the time to reserve a table so you can unwrap years of family fun on Christmas morning. Everything you need for in-home and even backyard entertainment is at Billiards Plus. They are family owned and operated, and when you talk to the staff at Billiards Plus, you know you're talking to an expert who won't steer you wrong. No matter the season, Billiards Plus has you covered for all your indoor and outdoor entertainment needs. Kenny, Sarah, and the whole staff will always go above and beyond to give you the best customer service in the industry. Billiards Plus. Visit their showroom on Dublin Center Drive in Dublin. Ryan, let's go positive first because I want to come back after a break and be a little negative guy here. Will Howard, his accuracy has improved drastically. I know that NFL scouts were wondering if going to Ohio State, if his accuracy would get better. It has. And him being a guy that's really good and really solid at the short to intermediate passes, and he's better there than I think he was at Kansas State. I think that's one reason that his draft stock is rising. Is that a good way to look at it?
I think so. I would say it like this, Jay. And anytime, because the draft process is just a resume process, right? Like
Yeah.
you're a job interview process. And you know, as someone that I'm sure has had, several job interviews like I have in my lifetime, when you're talking about a resume, employers are looking at the resume and saying, do you have the requisite skill set? Do you have the background to back it up? Are you a good person, outside of just kind of the day-to-day perspective? Like all those things are ability to check boxes ultimately, and that makes you an attractive candidate for a job. And I think when you're talking about Will Howard, he kind of has a lot of requisite things that you like as a backup quarterback. You are correct. He has improved his accuracy. His decision-making has been solid to good most of the time. I mean, there's been a couple of spots where you're just like, but every quarterback makes a bad decision occasionally. Like even Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and the best of the best in the NFL right now, they make bad decisions at times. Everyone does. I think for the most part, his decision-making has been clean this year. And as I mentioned before, he's going to be over 6'4". He's going to be 240 pounds. He's probably going to test relatively well athletically. Like he's a pretty solid runner for his size. I imagine he'd be like a 4'7" something type of athlete, which at 6'4" is fine. It's solid enough, right? And I think that the arm strength, while not plus on the NFL level, it's solid enough. Like it is NFL standard to be a backup quarterback in the NFL. So I think just there's not a lot of negatives, right? There's not a lot of boxes that you just kind of like have a subtraction sign in there, right? Like you don't have a negative there. You have a lot of pluses or a lot of checks is a better way to put it. So I think he does enough that you look at and say, that's an attractive candidate for the NFL level. Nothing is going to necessarily wow you. There's no elite level trait with a Will Howard in any capacity, but there's a lot of solid to good, which matters for NFL teams making that distinction.
How do you grade his deep ball strength and accuracy?
I think the arm strength is fine enough to push the ball down the field.
Okay.
I think the ball placement is very sporadic and inconsistent, which is why I think ultimately he is a backup quarterback on the next level, because he has the short to intermediate range, which is solid to good for the most part. And then the deep areas of the field, I think he's just going to consistently struggle to push the ball down the field. Like a lot of the balls that I've seen get completed down the field is like Jeremiah Smith, crazy adjustments to the back shoulder and like that type of ball, right? So I think that his arm strength is okay enough. I don't think it's great as far as pushing the ball down the field, but I think it's fine enough. I just think that generally the ball placement and accuracy down the field is a little bit up and down, a little bit sporadic, which it happens, right? Because both those things are correlated together. One, ability to push the ball down the field. Obviously, that's a general arm strength conversation. But when you don't have a plus arm and you don't have an easy arm, sometimes the ball's going to fade a little bit in the air. The ball's going to tail a little bit in the air. You're going to throw behind guys at times. I just don't think that he has the tools necessary to be a great deep ball thrower. So I think that is probably going to be the hindering spot that limits his draft evaluation a little bit.
One guy whose draft evaluation has not been limited this year, but it's been better than I think advertised or I thought it was going to be. His play has been really good. Is TreVeyon Henderson. He's been coupled with Quinshon Judkins, and both of those guys have split time starting this year. Henderson started most games. But Ryan, let's start with number 32 first. He's been there more than Quinshon Judkins at Ohio State. And Henderson's play this year, he's running harder. His vision has gotten better. He's running through tackles. I mean, all of the things that were somewhat questions or areas that he needed to improve, he's shown that he's working on them and he's improving there, which means I know running backs don't generally get picked in the first round.
Yeah.
If you were a pick 30 through 32, it wouldn't shock me because he does a lot of things currently the NFL people love.
Well, I think he's for sure a day 2 player at worst.
Yes.
So we're talking second to third round pick. I think it's probably somewhere in the earlier day 2 conversation for me right now. Like I would probably project him to be a second rounder as long as the medicals check out. Now he's had a healthy season so far, which is a great sign. But we do know, like, when we're talking about the evaluation process, we're looking a little bit more long-term than the short-term. Like short-term, TreVeyon will be healthy enough, I'm sure. Long-term, can I get to a second contract? Can I project out 5+ years? Like, what is the long-term outlook? Because he has been banged up a lot, obviously, at his career at Ohio State. And then running backs naturally just have a little bit of a shorter shelf life because they take a lot of wear and tear on their body with their high-volume aspects to their game. But I do think, and we've talked about him over the years, I have always loved the athlete, TreVeyon Henderson. I mean, this kid is explosive, and that explosiveness is still there. I think early in the year, the explosiveness was still coming back a little bit, right? Like you were still kind of easing into it. But the last few games, you're like, okay, there it is. Like the Oregon run, I'm like, yep, there it is. It's right there. I see it. So I love the explosiveness. I love the one cut and go. He has been a lot more efficient working through contact this year and working through traffic, which is good. I don't think it'll be ever be necessarily a great player working through traffic all the time because I just don't think that he's necessarily a power-oriented runner. He's a one cut and go speed guy. Like that's what he is ultimately. As long as he's healthy, I think he'll go pretty early in this draft overall. Like I think that him being 214 pounds, him being explosive, him having home run speed, that is obviously a big sell. I do think he's also a pretty natural hands catcher. I would love Ohio State to feature him in the pass game a little bit more. Like I would like to see him get more opportunities, but I do think he can do that because every time I see him attempt to catch or move out in space, he does look pretty natural at it. It's just a question of, can he do it on a wide scale perspective? And I wish Ohio State would feature that a little bit more. That would help his draft stock a ton.
Let's go to a guy who I think could really benefit from another year in college football, and Quinshon Judkins. I was high on him coming in, getting it to see him more every single week. I understand why I was high on him, but there's also some areas that Henderson's clearly better at, which isn't a problem. It's just Judkins can maybe work on those areas, but maybe those might not be a part of his game going forward. Quinshon Judkins, you weren't really as high on him as other people before the season. Have your thoughts about him gotten better through this point in the year?
Not really. I mean, like here, I think Quinshon Judkins on the next level is a good committee back. And when I say committee back, I'm not saying like he's like a second to a guy that's getting 80% of the touches. I'm saying like I think he could be a second in a 1B and a 1 in a committee approach. Like I think that he can be that type of player because he's got tremendous power, man. He's physical. He runs with good pad level. He runs with good pace as a runner. Like there's a lot of good with Quinshon. I'm just the two biggest things, and he'll block his butt off too. So he'll be a good pass protector, which is good. But the two biggest things that continue to keep holding me back with Quinshon, he doesn't have great long speed, but I'm not as worried about that. He's a running back. I don't need great long speed. So that's not really a negative for me. The two biggest thing are, I think his vision is very hit or miss. I'm not a huge fan of it. I just think that there's sometimes where he's a little bit outside dependent, like he bounces a ton instead of kind of remaining patient and working for cutbacks and that type of thing, working through traffic. I just think that that's something that he generally struggles with. Number two is I just think there's limitations as a pass receiver. We haven't seen an incredible volume as a pass receiver. He's had a couple nice catches for Ohio State, but I just like, if I'm projecting a guy to be a high volume pass catcher, I just don't necessarily see him in that capacity either. So for me, he's a power back with lack of vision, which is a little bit troubling on the NFL level. Like, I don't want to compare him to Trey Sermon because I do think he's a better prospect than Sermon, but like, what were the things that were troubling about Sermon, Jay? Sermon looked the part. He was physical. He was pretty explosive getting to top gear, but his vision wasn't good, man. And that like held him back when he got to the NFL, and he fumbled a little bit, but like that's a kind of a byproduct of it. I think Quinshon could be a good compartmentalized weapon in a committee approach. I just don't necessarily see like some people are hyping him up as like the running back 2 behind Ashton Jeanty in this class. And like, I just don't see that type of guy.
Let's do one more here before break. And I'm very curious about this one because to start this year, there was a guy named Carson Hinsman that was not really thought about. Well, by some people said he should have played a lot. He didn't really play much at all early in the year. All of a sudden, there's an injury at left tackle. There's another injury at left tackle. He's back in the starting lineup. He gets the most playing time against Penn State. And you're sitting here thinking, why has this guy been on the bench? Now, I'm curious from an NFL standpoint how an NFL evaluator views a guy who started 12 games a year ago, didn't start quite a few games this year. All of a sudden, he's back in the starting lineup, and he might be the best offensive lineman that day he's getting his first start that year. How does all this impact his draft stock?
I mean, it's a wait and see approach right now, man. Like, I mean, he can't be a 2025 NFL draft prospect right now. Like, we're had to look forward to 2026. But I do think it's a very fascinating conversation, like internally with Ohio State, with Justin Fry, with the offensive coaching staff of like, did we misevaluate this kid? I mean, because like that would be my question right now. I think there was a misevaluation of him on this offensive line. Because like, cool, you brought in Seth McLaughlin from Alabama. He's been very good for you, right? Like he's been a very good starting center for Alabama. So like that was a good evaluation by the staff. I didn't love that pickup when it first happened, but McLaughlin's been really good for Alabama. But I think the lack of evaluation is obviously you have Donovan Jackson at left guard coming into the season. That's cool. But like the right guard spot, you kind of had a little bit of a revolving door. I know 77 was playing a ton. I know that they were rotating another guy in at some points, right? So like it's like, why wasn't Hinzman? I don't know if he was given a fair chance, but like, why wasn't he the guy? Because I find it hard to believe that he was like so much worse than all of these guys, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
And then against Penn State, when you had to move Donovan Jackson to left tackle, by the way, poor Donovan Jackson doing it, whatever he needs to do for the team. But his first assignment is against Abdul Carter. Like that stinks, dude. Like that is not a great situation.
No,
but I find it hard to believe that Carson Hinsman is like the third or fourth guard on your roster, and then he gets plugged into duty against Penn State, and you could make an argument that he was your best offensive lineman against Penn State a couple weeks ago. So it's a wait and see as far as evaluation. I'm curious to see, one, because Josh Simmons does have another year of eligibility, just like first and foremost. Next year, this is more like an interesting offseason conversation. Is Hinzman your starting left guard in place of Donovan Jackson? Do you move him back to center? Like next year, he has to be one of your 5 just based upon probably what you have coming back. But I'm very interested now because it is a valuable asset long-term because now you can say I've started games at center, at guard. Like that matters a ton. I'm just curious how this Ohio State team sees him going into the 2025 college football season. Like, is he a center? Is he left guard? Is he a right guard? That's going to be a fascinating offseason conversation, I think.
One thing that's going to be fascinating is something I'm going to throw at Ryan as a curveball to spend more time on the final topic that we have for today. And it's not guys that are draft eligible for this year. One of them is eligible in 2026. The other one's 2027. We'll dive into Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, and it's all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. All the action goes down in 2 places on the FanDuel Sportsbook app and at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So these 2 guys, Ryan, are 2 guys that have been kind of a breath of fresh air and kind of wowing me when they're out there on the field. We're going to go with the oldest guy first in downs and then go to the true freshman second. Caleb Downs, to me, is one of those guys. I said it to you earlier. Look at the box score. Okay, 3rd in tackles. Okay, 4th in tackles. Maybe 5th. And you're thinking, why is everybody hyping him up to say that he's the best guy on defense You look at his numbers from a year ago, he led Alabama in tackles. You're thinking, if he did that down there in Alabama, but he's not doing it at Ohio State, what's the problem? Maybe it's that Ohio State's defense doesn't need him to do that right now. But also, I think his impact is felt in a way that nobody else in the defense has the same impact that is felt in that way as Downs. Forget the whole draft evaluation right now, man. His impact on this defense is insane.
Jay, you always hear me. I think you've heard me say before that there's some players that are just easy evaluations, and Caleb Downs was one of them, and he was a 5-star, so I'm not like a genius for saying wow, Caleb Downs is really good. But I remember watching Caleb Downs come down to Georgia, and I'm just like, guys, I don't need to watch him anymore, man. That's a 5-star. That's a dude. I mean, he had an argument. I think I actually, because I did recruiting at the time, I think I had him pegged as the number 1 overall recruit in his class coming out in the 2023 class. I loved Caleb Downs, man. He was special, and he is special. He's 6 foot, 200 plus pounds. He has experience playing deep safety. He's experience playing more in the box. He's some experience playing in the slot at times when you need him to do that stuff. He's a very versatile movement-based player on the back end for a defense. And the thing, and we talked about this slightly, his dad is a college football coach, and for me, Caleb Downs is the perfect marriage of really talented athlete that also you can tell is a coach's kid, because he's just so technically sound. He doesn't miss tackles in open field. That's been one of the coolest things about him at Ohio State. It's he just doesn't miss an open field. He's always in the right spot. And then he's also a really, really talented athlete. So this is a very, Ohio State has a bunch of NFL players, obviously, on the defense, just in general. Tyleek, we've talked about a ton. JT Tuimoloau, Denzel Burke, Lathan Ransom's having a great year at safety as well. There's a lot of NFL football players. Sonny Styles will eventually be an NFL football player as well. But I think the thing that is, when we're talking about the box score stuff, they play very complementary football, right? It's not like Caleb Downs won and then everybody else is just a solid player. It's you're playing with a bunch of dudes all over the place ultimately, right? So it's the, feeding a lot of mouths conversation, but Caleb's special, dude. He makes everything easier in front of him, around him. He is a fantastic football player who, it's crazy to say, because I know you said we're going to start with the old guy. I mean, we're talking about a 20-year-old that can still get a whole lot better. You know what I mean? So yeah, he has a great argument, even if the stats don't necessarily say it. Him with Malachi Starks from Georgia, who's the best safety in college football? Caleb Downs is a very strong conversation into that one.
So my question to you about Caleb Downs, would he be a top 5 pick in this year's draft?
Potentially. So would he be a top 5 player, I think, is a better question, Jay.
Okay.
Because top 5 pick, safeties fall a little bit. I mean, Kyle Hamilton might be the best safety in the NFL right now, and he was the 14th pick because everyone's oh, he's a safety. He's going to move down boards. Malachi Starks is probably going to have the same treatment where it's wow, Malachi Starks went 12th overall, even though he's probably a top 5 player in the 2025 NFL draft. I think the great conversation would have been, one, is he a top 5 to 10 player? Probably. I mean, he's at least in that conversation. It would have been I don't like using the word generational, but that would have been a generational safety conversation. Who's better? Malachi Starks, Caleb Downs. Let's battle him back and forth. He would have had a very strong conversation for being a top 10 overall player in the class, because again, he just doesn't have, there's just not a weakness with Caleb Downs. So you're oh, he's too small. Nope, not true. He's not athletic enough. Nope, not true. He's not instinctive enough. Nope, not true. He's one of those guys that is plus at everything he does, which makes him just such an easy evaluation for the next level.
Let's go to Jeremiah Smith here quickly. We'll kind of do the same thing, talk about him a little bit, then get your whole thoughts about him, where he would fall in this year's draft. Jeremiah Smith, as great as Marvin Harrison Jr. was at Ohio State, as great as Njigba was during that 1 year, literally a one-hit wonder, kind of, that one full season where he kind of went off. Jeremiah Smith has a shot to be one of those college football receivers we talk about 20 years down the road, kind of like we do with Randy Moss, where a lot of people are still talking about him and what he did in college, where you're yeah, it's just you expected it. After a while, it's oh, Randy Moss, you expect him to do otherworldly things. Jeremiah Smith is that. I have never seen a receiver as a freshman play as well as he is, but also his maturity. He doesn't act like an 18-year-old. He acts like he's 24, 25 as far as his maturity with football. There are things he still needs to learn.
Sure.
But, man, he's so much fun to watch. I have a hard time describing him because like all the great things we could say about him is kind of just like, oh, he's just him. He's just that dude. Why watch him play? Let his play describe him. My words can do a whole lot, but I feel like I fall short with describing him because we're saying the same thing over and over because we're just lifting up the ceiling about how great he is.
We have seen some good true freshman wide receivers at Ohio State, right? Like we have over the years, but they're usually like second, third, even fourth options, right? Like
Yes.
Garrett Wilson came in and was like a good player, but like on a lower scale, right? Like Jackson Smith and Jigba had that one crazy catch against was that
Nebraska.
Clemson or I forget what was the one-footed catch he had in the back of the end zone? Was that Nebraska? His freshman
Nebraska,
year?
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we've seen guys make an impact as a freshman, but we haven't seen recently a guy for Ohio State come in and be the best wide receiver in the best wide receiver room in college football. That's what he's done. Because I feel bad for Emeka Egbuka. Like we're underrating the season Emeka Egbuka is having.
Correct.
He's having a great year,
Yes.
but everyone wants to talk about number 4, obviously, right? Like Cornell Tate's had some moments. Brandon Inniss was instrumental against Penn State, right? Like this wide receiver room is bananas, dude. Like it's insane. And Jeremiah Smith's the best one of the best wide receiver room in college football. This is Julio Jones all over again. I remember seeing Julio Jones at Alabama, and I'm just like, well, that looks different as a true freshman. It's like he's 6'3 plus 215 pounds, and he looks like he could play in the NFL tomorrow. Mm-hmm. I had a buddy that texted me, Jay, that was like, if Jeremiah Smith was draft eligible, would he be wide receiver 1? And those conversations usually for me are like a laugh off, like, come on, man, we're not having that conversation. For me, though, I'm like, yeah, I think he would be. Like, I think he would be. If there was some exception you can make that said, like, hey, Jeremiah, you can enter the NFL this year if you wanted to as a true freshman, he would be one of the short list of exceptions that would be like, he could probably do that, right? Like, he could probably make that happen if he wanted to. So he's a freak, man. He's 6'3", 215 pounds. His presence is felt every single week. He does some, and I saw him he was at the All-American Bowl this past January, competing down in San Antonio, and you can see it there, man. Like everyone, players and media included, every time Jeremiah Smith had a one-on-one, you stopped. Like you stopped and you watched to make sure you saw him. Like he was that type of player. So yeah, he's been fascinating. He's been tremendous. He has arguably been one of the top 2 or 3 wide receivers in college football in a very talented and very crowded wide receiver room.
The question a lot of people want to know that are Ohio State fans, and I'm going to close it out with this. It's not a draft question. It's more about the season this year. Does he have a realistic shot to win the Biletnikoff this season?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he has to be in the conversation, I think, right? Like, it's going to be one of those years where is his numbers going to be as big as some other guys that are going to be on that list? No, because he doesn't have to share the ball with Emeka Egbuka and Cornell Tate and all these dudes. Like he just doesn't have to do it. The 2 running backs, right? So there needs to be a deeper conversation of like the best wide receiver versus the best stat line at wide receiver. But again, like if you told me, if your opinion was simply this, I think Jeremiah Smith is the best wide receiver in college football, so he should win the Biletnikoff, I wouldn't really have any pushback on you. I really wouldn't. I think that he should definitely be in the conversation. If he wins it, I would have zero issue because who has been the most dominant wide receiver in college football this year, I think he has a great argument to be in that conversation without question.
I appreciate Ryan for coming on the show once again. This won't be the last time you hear him at all on this show. And maybe we can get him once or twice again during the season, touch on guys like Tuimoloau and Sawyer and Burke. A lot of people have questions about Burke and his draft stock. Ryan's got to answer those questions that you have about Ohio State players that are on the team this year. You can follow Ryan on Twitter at Rise, the letter in draft. Follow me on the same platform at JStevens07. We're up out of here on a Tuesday, Buckeye fans. We'll see you next time.